We now know the vast majority of information about next season's non-conference schedule. Just how difficult is it going to be?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? It's Thursday, June 6th, 2024. Coach, I think I got the date wrong yesterday. I think I called it Wednesday, June 6th. Look, I say the date a lot. The fact that I don't get it wrong more often is quite frankly a miracle. But it is today, Thursday, June 6th. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, joined today by our guy, Coach Bill Robinson, the head coach of the Milligan University Buffaloes and a two-decade veteran of the Carolina Summer Basketball Camp coming up very, very soon. And you're joining us at the place to get your Tar Heels content every single day. Really want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch. And we want to send a special shout out to all of you everydayers and all the members of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord. That thing keeps growing like crazy. We'd love for you to come join us. This episode's brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Coming up on the show today, we are looking at the non-con schedule. Had a really interesting listener question, on Twitter about the non-con schedule and why it seems less rigorous than last year's. We got some interesting observations about that. And of course, we'll have story time with Coach Rob coming up. So, Coach, let's dive right into this thing. On Wednesday morning, Jon Rothstein tweeted out an update that Carolina was going to be hosting American on Friday, November 15th. Coach, kind of looking at what we knew about the schedule, expected another game to be in that window of time somewhere, and that's exactly what happened. And it now essentially rounds out the non-con schedule. We're going to look at that in just a second. And I'm actually, for those of you watching on YouTube, going to pull up my little chart of what we already know about the non-con. But, Coach, obviously there are connections to the North Carolina program and American. So would you just talk a little bit about that? And I'll go ahead and pull the schedule up while you do.
Yeah, that's our good friend, Jackie Manuel. Jackie left the staff a couple years ago now, and Marcus Page took his spot. But he was going up there to be a full assistant in American. So, of course, Carolina being Carolina is going to be able to keep that relationship going with family and schedule a game with American. So I think that'll help everybody. Of course, helps American getting on the national stage, but also helps Carolina hopefully get a good non-conference win early in the season.
That's right, man. You love these bye games. And I love, I know a lot of programs obviously do this, Coach, but I love Carolina, as you said, keeping it in the family. So often Coach Smith or Coach Williams would take players back, to play in a road game close to their home. Or we do things like this, like let's honor people in the vicinity, either close schools or things like that. And I'm right with you. I think this is a really cool thing. So, Coach, non-conference schedule is 11 games. We now essentially know a ton about it. There's only a few things missing. Let me run us through the schedule just to get everyone up to speed for those who haven't been keeping tabs on it, and then we'll go from there. So first game of the season is hosting Elon Monday, November 4th. That's the first day you can play games. That Friday, heading to Lawrence, Kansas to take on the Jayhawks in the first of a home-and-home series. And then the next Friday, this game we just talked about, November 15th, American. And then the next Friday, so 3 straight Fridays of games, Coach. I want to ask you about Friday in college basketball here in just a second. But on the way out to Maui, Carolina is going to play at Hawaii, a true road game for one of those 4 kind of bye games we typically look at. And then Thanksgiving week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the Maui Invitational. We don't know the bracket yet. We do know the field. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then I expect the week after that, Tuesday or Wednesday, December 3rd or 4th, to be the ACC SEC. And then hosting LaSalle on Saturday, December 14th, playing Florida on Tuesday, December 17th in the Jumpman Invitational, and then UCLA on Saturday, December 21st in the CBS Sports Classic. So, Coach, something I talk a lot about is I love it in the early parts of the college basketball calendar when we get a lot of good Friday games. We're getting the Carolina-Kansas game on a Friday. Obviously, a lot of that is while football's still going on Saturdays. Coach, I kind of wish college basketball would keep that going throughout the season. What are your thoughts on that?
I love it in the fall because Saturday, again, in the fall is going to be college football day, and you don't want to try to compete with those big games. I honestly don't like the Friday night games. And a big part of that for me is that's the night we go recruiting. Those are high school. Tuesday, Fridays are big high school nights for us. And we try not to play JV games on Fridays. We never schedule games on Fridays unless it's a tournament where we're playing a Friday, Saturday Classic or something like that. We've got a couple of those coming up in the fall. But I think for the fall, I think it's brilliant playing that Friday night game. And again, we don't want to compete with college football, not in November or December. But I think January and February, stay away from those Friday games as much as possible.
Man, and it's so interesting to see this. You play Monday, kind of opening day, we'll call it. But then after that, no midweek games until Maui, Coach. It's just those 3 straight Fridays. So folks, kind of go ahead and start scheduling your November calendar around those Friday evenings because it's the 8th, 15th, and 22nd. So pretty crazy stuff there. That Maui field, as a reminder, is Auburn, Colorado, Dayton, Iowa State, Memphis, Michigan State, and UConn. Coach, I named that field and your eyebrows just went up. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, back to the Friday thing. I think they also use it for recruiting now. So if you can have a Friday home game before Saturday football game, it just ties in perfectly to get those kids, get to see you guys play, and then you see a great atmosphere down at Kenan Stadium. I think that's part of what that draw is all about. The Maui's going to be as competitive as any tournament out there. I think it's way harder than maybe the tournament they played in the Bahamas last year. And I just think it doesn't matter who they play in that, they're going to get challenged every game in that tournament. So I think playing in Hawaii is not. I mean, those people in Hawaii love basketball, and if you have an away game, in the States here, you're still gonna have a whole lot of Carolina people show up. But you have an away game in Hawaii, right there in Honolulu. That's going to be a tough crowd, believe it or not, to play in front of. So that's not a given either. Right? It's a really tough place to play.
And kind of an interesting coincidence, a year after Justin McCoy had transferred there to finish off his college career as well. So, Coach, there are a couple things, we still don't know about the non-conference schedule. Number one, we're just talking about Maui. We don't yet have the Maui bracket, and so we don't know who the first opponent is or any of the succeeding ones. Also, as a reminder, I talked about this a week or two ago. Chaminade is not in the field this year. They only play every other year now, so we don't see them. The other things we don't know yet, we don't know the opponent for ACC SEC Challenge. I expect that to be, since we're not playing Kentucky in CBS Sports Classic, either Kentucky or Alabama or Arkansas. It's not a guarantee, but something like that. Based on how the calendar has come together in recent years, we also don't know the date yet for ACC SEC, but again, I expect it to be December 3rd or 4th. That's a Tuesday or Wednesday. And then we also don't know for sure the location for the CBS Sports Classic. It's been speculated by Jon Rothstein that it will be at Madison Square Garden, but there's not been confirmation on that yet. So, Coach, out of all that, and we're going to talk here in that next segment about comparing this year's non-con to last year's, but in totality, as you look at that, as a head basketball coach, are you pleased with that non-conference schedule, knowing what you've got ahead in ACC play as well?
I am. I think you need a couple games to get some wins, to get some base to your team, and really get a chance to see your whole squad play, and not have to worry just about playing 6 or 7. But you need a game or two where you can play 12 guys and really get to see what the guys are like when the lights are on. So I like having a couple of those type of games. I think the opportunity maybe to play in Madison Square Garden, that's a big thing for Hubert, obviously being a former Knick. He thinks that stage is really important for his guys. He thinks that prepares him better for tournament time when you have to walk into arguably the greatest arena in America, obviously maybe in the world. It's one of the coolest places. I took our team up there to play a few years back in Manhattan, and got a chance to tour the facility with our guys backstage, all access passes. Whatever, but it was phenomenal. Just to walk through that place gives you goosebumps. So I think those are the type of games, those are the type of scenarios that he really thinks is important to get his team prepared for postseason play.
One of the things that's interesting to me, Coach, I hadn't really caught this till you were just talking about it, but I was looking at the locations. Carolina will not play a single back-to-back game in the Dean Dome in the non-conference portion of the schedule, unless the early ACC game just happens to coincide, like after, if it's at home after the ACC SEC thing and ahead of the LaSalle game, you might get back-to-back. But that's interesting because, like last year, for example, you start the season hosting Radford, Lehigh, and UC Riverside back-to-back in the Smith Center. You get comfortable at home, you do all that. But Coach, this non-con schedule, literally never back-to-back games inside the Dean Dome. And so you might not play home 2 games in a row until you get to conference play. What does that say to you? Is that good, bad, or indifferent in your mind?
I think that's Hubert's way of saying that they're ready for anybody, anywhere, anytime. I don't think they're scared of anybody. Obviously, they don't have a need to be. But I think that means, hey, we don't need the time. We're going to be ready to go day one. We're not looking for a couple weeks to get ready. We're ready to go right now. I think that's the mentality. It's tough, but I think at the same time, that's what he's looking for. He wants to challenge those guys, and that's a huge challenge early on to make sure that they understand it. That you can't – there's no time to warm up. You got to be ready from day one to be ready to go.
All right. So we'll see what happens with that. Again, as I said, while this is the non-con schedule, we do expect an ACC game in there somewhere. I believe it will be, if things mirror what it's been the last couple years, between the ACC SEC Challenge game and the LaSalle game. I'm looking for that on Saturday, December 7th or Sunday, December 8th. So keep your eyes out on that. Now, Coach, there was a question on Twitter about why doesn't this year's non-con schedule look as rigorous as last year's? I'm not so sure that it is, and I don't think you are either, Coach. We're going to try to answer that question coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time. I'm really excited for the NBA Finals. It starts tonight. I've never been to an NBA Finals game. I'd love to go. But, maybe you decide last minute, like, hey, I want to get in on that. It's a whim. Well, good news, folks. Prices on the Game Time app go down the closer to tip-off you get. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee. And with all of that, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. How about some deals for the game tonight? Game 1 of the NBA Finals, flash deal, section 319, row 15. Coach, I went and looked at it right before we started recording. 10% off from $709 down to $617. I know that sounds steep, but if you want to get in the door, you got to pay the price. Cheapest ticket listed at $561. Go check it out and be part of the action there up in Boston tonight. Man, catch a flight. Do it. Take the guesswork out of buying buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We're looking today at Carolina's non-conference schedule for the upcoming basketball season. We know a lot of what's going on. I've left the schedule up for those of you watching on YouTube. Coach, where I want to head next, we got a question on Twitter from @UNCFanInfo, who I know is in the Locked On Tar Heels Discord as well. Always good to be able to shout them out. And ask this question: why is our non-conference not rigorous like last season? So, Coach, let me quickly remind everyone of last season's non-conference schedule, and then I'll let you go on some thoughts on it, and we can go back and forth. The bye games last year, we mentioned 3 of them: Radford, Lehigh, and UC Riverside. The last was Charleston Southern right before ACC play started. Battle for Atlantis, Carolina played Northern Iowa, Villanova, and Arkansas. ACC SEC Challenge was Tennessee at home. The Jimmy V Classic was UConn at Madison Square Garden. CBS Sports Classic was Kentucky. And Jumpman Invitational in Charlotte was Oklahoma, who was undefeated at the time, but wasn't as good later on. So, Coach, as you look at that and you look at that schedule we've been talking about, first off, do you agree or not agree that about this year's schedule not being as rigorous?
Honestly, I think they're very, very similar. The playing 3 home games to start the season last year, I think makes that a little bit easier. You're going to be 3-0 to start the year. I don't feel that way this year. We could very well be 1-1 to start the season and still be playing well. So I think we still, to be fair, we need to find out what those games we're not really sure about, especially the SEC game. If that's a top tier game, that's going to be just as hard as some of the non-conference games we played last year. So I do think it's very similar. I don't know what the numbers look like, but I think when it comes right down to it, just being able to play so many games on the road early, and like you talked about in segment one, no real back-to-back home games, I think it's going to be just as tough as last year, if not maybe just a little bit tougher.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Coach, because it's not just about opponent. It's about location. It's about travel schedule. I mean, I'm thinking back to 3 seasons ago where you go up to Portland for the PK85. You don't even go back to Chapel Hill. You go straight to Bloomington to play Indiana at Assembly Hall. You come home, and then you go to Blacksburg to play Virginia Tech that very next weekend. And just so based on opponent alone, you probably think, hey, we can handle Indiana and we can handle Virginia Tech. But with that kind of schedule, I mean, it's bonkers. So, Coach, that's a great point about the travel of it all. As you look at the bye games, one of the things is that, as we've mentioned, all 4 were in the Smith Center last year. This year, one of them is at Hawaii, where you already talked about, Coach. They love their basketball. I kind of compared the Ken Palm numbers. I'm not going to run all the way through it because that'll just get laborious. But here's what you need to know. Hawaii and LaSalle, 2 of this year's 4, are both better than the best bye game opponent that Carolina played last year. And then American and Elon are just kind of, I mean, so those games are basically a wash. And Coach, we talked about that Maui field. And with all due respect to Northern Iowa, Nova, and Arkansas, I know we lost to Villanova, but they were not good last year. Arkansas was not good last year. And so I don't care who you get out of Auburn, Colorado, Dayton, Iowa State, Memphis, Michigan State, and UConn. It's going to be like you take the worst 3 out of that group, and it's probably a better trio than Atlantis was last year, right?
No, definitely. And I was at that Virginia Tech game at Virginia Tech a couple years ago, and they just looked tired. Armando didn't play that game,
right.
and they got beat, but they just looked like a tired team. And that's what you have to worry about being on the road. And, of course, they travel better than most teams would anyway, but it's still it just takes a lot out of you. Just being on a plane, being on a bus, it just takes a lot out. So I do think the travel is going to be brutal this year. I would imagine that SEC game is going to be on the road. So it's going to be a challenge to keep those guys not just healthy, but also just with the high energy that they need to be able to play the style they want to play.
Yeah, I mean, Coach, you mentioned it, the ACC SEC game, maybe on the road, maybe at home. We don't know yet. We kind of expect it to be on the road since it was at home last year. But I heard at one point this offseason, I've heard Adam Lucas refer to maybe speculating. There was something that he had that it was like that it might be home again. I don't know for sure. But Coach, we said earlier, I would expect Kentucky or Bama or Arkansas, right? Like that just seems like who we'd get paired up with.
Yeah, my guess would be Arkansas. I think I don't think anybody wants to see Alabama and Carolina again, and Kentucky with everything going on there. We just don't know. Coach Polk's done a great job assembling a squad, but I would love to see a Coach Cal Arkansas team, which sounds really weird, but I'd love to see an opportunity for our guys to get a chance to play them early and see what he's building down there in Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, they just recently got Trevin Brazile back. We've been talking about that on the show this week. They've now got 9 guys on the roster. Maybe you could try to stick it to Jonas Adu for not coming to Carolina. That would be interesting as well. So you compare that, and as we keep comparing on down, CBS Sports Classic, Kentucky last year, UCLA this year. I think that is one game where last year would have been more rigorous, Kentucky, and we don't expect UCLA to be great again. Jumpman Invitational. I know, again, Oklahoma was undefeated at the time Carolina played them last year, but they turned out to not be all that really great, struggled in Big 12 play. I think Florida is going to be a strong unit this year, Coach. And then as we look at the other non-con game last year, it was UConn in a neutral site at Madison Square Garden. So I know they're the defending national champion, and they were an absolute wagon last year. But this year, the game you compare that with is the Kansas game at Kansas. I think that's a more difficult game than UConn at MSG. And so, Coach, those last couple games there, what are your thoughts?
You talk about a program that just the fans love their team, and that Kansas game at Fog Allen. I mean, there are very few bucket list things out there for me. I still love to do. I would love to see a Carolina Kansas game in Fog Allen. That would be just an amazing setting. But yeah, that's very similar to what a UConn game would be in a neutral site. And I think the UCLA game is very interesting because their style is so different than what Hubert wants to be able to do with this squad. So it's really a battle of wills. And if the game's in the 50s and 60s, Carolina's going to have a hard time winning that game, or at least it'll be close. But again, if it's 80s, 90s, or 100s, feel comfortable winning that game. But again, that's two very different styles, two really good coaches. And that's going to be just a war as well.
Man. So UNC fan info, great question. Glad you asked it. That's a fun breakdown. Coach, having talked more through it, do you feel the same as you did at the top of this segment, saying at the very least it's comparable to last year? You still feel that, or do you think now the scales have tipped one way or the other for you?
I still think they're very comparable. Last year's schedule, let's be honest, it's brutal. And that's what you get when you're a Carolina basketball team. You're going to play the very best. You're going to challenge yourselves. You're going to take anybody, anywhere, anytime, and play the very best competition you can to get you ready for the tournament. I think Hubert and his staff has done the same thing this year.
Yeah, that's good. Good word. And I think ultimately part of the reason for it too, part of the reason for feeling less rigorous might be just in part because we don't know some of the opponents yet, right? Like it's just speculation. And but I tell you what, folks, once those names are cemented in, then you're going to know how rigorous the schedule will be. All right, it's a Coach Rob episode, and you know that means we got to get to story time. We're going to do that coming up in just a second. Coach Rob has been working the Carolina basketball camp now for about 2 decades. It's ridiculous. Coming up here in just a couple weeks. In fact, next week when Coach Rob's on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about it, what to expect from camp, the things he'll get to see, not just from camp, but almost more importantly, the games at night between the fellas and alumni and things like that. So that'll be fun to chat on next week. But Coach has been working on a book, compiling all these great stories from all his years at camp. And so we typically ask him to share one of those stories with us, and he is gracious enough to do so. So, Coach, the floor is yours, my man. Take it away.
Yeah, growing up in New Jersey, I didn't root for college teams at all. I rooted for the Yankees. I rooted for the 76ers, but I didn't have a real reason to root for a college team. There's no real college team. I mean, Rutgers, who's going to root for Rutgers, I guess. But the reason I'm a Carolina fan is because during camp time, I've got to be able to be friends with the staff and friends with the players. And, closer, this year, obviously got a chance to be friends with Paxton Wojcik. But one of my favorite players I've got a chance to be really good friends with is Jackson Simmons. And got to recruit Jackson when he was playing in Smoky Mountain in a high school out there, his hometown. And I got to talk to him last week, and it reminded me of a story that I have of him. But we used to work, obviously, Carolina camp, and then you have Montrose camp in between. Jackson, as a player, would work that, and he would come eat lunch with us. So we got to spend some time together just during lunch or whatever, he'd come and hang out. But Frank Fuqua, who we have a whole chapter about in the book, used to do individual workouts with the post guys in the afternoons. And that's when I got to see, workouts with Sean May and Marvin Williams and Ed Davis and Jackson Simmons, and really got a chance to spend some time. But Jackson told me a story about when he was a camper at Carolina camp and how Frank Fuqua pulled him aside and started teaching him, even as a high school kid. And he saw the potential in him and an opportunity for him to be coached by this legendary coach, Coach Fuqua, who had worked with all these Carolina guys. And then during the afternoons, they would do workouts in front of the campers, and Frank would be out there instructing Tyler Hansbrough as a Carolina player. And he listened to everything he said, and that made such an impression on Jackson. And Jackson obviously didn't get a chance to play at Carolina. 135 games. He was never a superstar, but he became part of that Carolina family. And now, how many years later, he's married to Buzz Peterson's daughter, and had an opportunity to work with the Hornets and part of that family, part of that Carolina family, and being able to work for Michael Jordan. And he just took a job at Western Carolina as an assistant coach. And because of our relationship, here's the rest of the story. We just scheduled a game with them for next year. So we'll get an opportunity to play them somewhere. It looks like somewhere in December, right before Christmas, after finals. So it's all about relationships, and that's what I really want the book to be able to talk about: the relationships between the Carolina staff and the coaches and these campers. And ultimately, over time, those campers grow up and be coaches. And so to see Jackson go from being a camper now to obviously being a coach, And to have that friendship is really something special for me.
Man, that's cool. Coach, I love those stories. And I love the full circle even of this episode where we started by talking about scheduling American and keeping it in the Carolina family. And then we kind of bring that around. Man, and if I remember correctly, Western Carolina had a good year last year in the Southern Conference. I think they had over 20 wins. And I'm so glad that Jackson's going to be part of that staff.
Well, that staff got the job of Coastal Carolina. So then they're there, and so Jackson joined the new staff there, and they've assembled a really good staff at Western Carolina. They're going to be good, and it's one of those games where, again, we'll test ourselves against a Division I opponent, knowing full well that that's not a game we're going to win, but it's great for our guys to experience that. And we had a really good game this year against Middle Tennessee State. Our best player played really well, and then when it came time for him to possibly sign with an agent, which he has, they were able to look at Division I game where he played really well, scored over 20 points, and showed what he can do at the very best competition level that we can find.
That's awesome. I love it, man. And I will never forget Jackson Simmons in that Florida State game, Coach. I think it was back in like the 2012-13 season. Just a breath of fresh air, helped Carolina ultimately pull out that dub. And so, yeah, that's great.
He was such a hard worker, and he earned everything. He didn't have the skills that some of the other guys did, or the athleticism, but man, he got every ounce of what his talent gave him.
Man, that's well said. And we've talked about it. We need to try to get Jackson on the show sometime, maybe this summer. That'd be a lot of fun. You and I to talk to him. All right, folks, another great story from Coach Rob. Great episode. We'd love to know what you think about the non-conference schedule, folks, how you think it's shaping up and what games you were excited for. Anyone going to Maui? We'd love to hear from you. I'm going to Maui, but it's this summer, not for the Invitational. Maybe I'll just plant a flag and wave hello or something. All right, you guys, if you're not subscribed to the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, we'd love for you to do that on audio and video. Just pull up your favorite podcast platform, search for Locked On Tar Heels, and hit subscribe. If you're doing it on YouTube, just hit subscribe. Make sure you hit that bell notification so you know when we're going live. If you're not part of the Locked On Tar Heels Discord, we'd love to have you in there. The link for it is in the show notes, both on audio and video. It's free to join. Seriously, come on in, come for the Tar Heels, stay for the community. That's what Coach Rob was just talking about. It's all about family. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow to wrap up the week. Get ready for the Super Regional as the Diamond Heels host West Virginia. But until then, peace.